It was early autumn of the year 1943. Fascist Italy had capitulated, but the German forces were coming furiously towards Albania. At that time, Albania was guarded by the 9th Army, or the Royal Italian Army, as it was known differently. September 8th ceasefire caused a significant crisis in terms of command and control, as the Supreme Command started to give confusing orders about the way how the Italian troops should deal with the situation created, especially with the Germans. Following the tense fights on September 11th, the Germans entered in Tirana and arrested the commander of the 9th Army, General Rossi, forcing him to order the capitulation of his soldiers in exchange of the apparently false promise to repatriate the division under his command. Such order was rejected by several commanders of the division, as it was against the military honor, and as such it led to the disbandment of the Italian military units. Each division commander responded taking into consideration the local situation. Some of them tried to reach the seashores and to eventually move to Italy, whereas some others took the other direction towards the mountainous inland as an effort to escape and join with the Albanian liberation movement. At the ceasefire time, the Italian division Perugia was active in the south of the country. The center of that command was located in Gjirokastër. They were in charge of keeping under control Saranda-Gjirokastër line, although the news of capitulation was announced since September 8th. The soldiers heard about it by chance on the radio. With no connection with the Supreme Command following the September 8th ceasefire, Perugia had to cope with the crisis on its own. After the defeat, thousands of Italian soldiers and officers were anxiously waiting for the repatriation. But the big question was, how would they return? Albanian partisans and national forces of that area, with the mediation of the English Mayor Tillman, had given to them the permission to move, but at one condition: to hand over all armaments and logistics. Although it looked like a glimmer of hope, they had no information that a senior German officer had arrived in Gjirokastër having the same demands. They found themselves amidst two fires and two fears. Should they fight, or whom to surrender to? On one side, there were the Albanian partisan forces led by the communists and the local population that was fighting against them. And on the other hand, were the Germans that were unsatisfied that their allies capitulated, and their plan was annihilation. However, on the morning of September 22nd, Division Perugia arrived at Saranda port to protect it and with hope for boarding. The day before, about 1,500 additional soldiers arrived from the mountainous areas. They were in miserable conditions, disarmed and plundered. There were a hope for sailing to Corfu, but the Greek island in front of Saranda was occupied by the Germans. 4 days later, on September 26th, Germans tried to land in Saranda, but they were repulsed. The coming days were full of uncertainty. Finally, news was spread that the Italian ships were coming to Porto Palermo, and the commander ordered the troops to head to the north. Division in panic moved hastily towards Porto Palermo. They did 55 kilometers overnight. On their way, being convinced that they will board on the ship, the order to hand over all the weapons to the Albanian partisans was given. On September 28th, Perugia infantry arrived in Porto Palermo, but they did not find any ships that they were expecting for their allies could have sent from the ports of liberated Italy. Meanwhile, the Germans had set in motion a real hunt. Already disarmed, Perugia units were split into groups, and with the help of Albanian asked for refuge in the continental hills. Unfortunately, they could not escape the Germans that had controlled every inch, and eventually almost all the Italians were captured and imprisoned. The rest returned to the city. They were hopeless. With Germans so close and extremely aggressive, the repatriation was impossible. However, a glimpse of hope arrived in the city. After facing many difficulties, the Italian warship SS Probitas arrived. An elderly resident of Saranda city, Cianisulo, used to tell several years ago that it was said that the ship that entered the Gulf that afternoon of October 1943 had come to get all Italian soldiers and officers that were in Saranda and in the surrounding areas following the capitation of Italy. The rest were scattered in the center of the city and in its suburbs in Limion. But the blue sky of that day all of a sudden darkened. The German bombers appeared above their heads. The shooters were brutal and cold-blooded, firing tons of shells on the ship. The end was tragic. Dozens of people were drowned, and an indescribable horror. From the ground, the Germans entered into the city and captured all. The Italian commander himself surrendered, together with his people. The rest of the army was brutally shot in the outskirts of the city.
Fire!
The tragic epilogue happened in the period between October 4th and 7th in two different locations. On October 4th, General Chiminello, the commander of division, and his military chief were killed in the Gulf of Limion. The next day, Giuseppe Adami, deputy commander of division, would write on his diary in the same place. Officers, apart from the troops, were boarded in boats in group of 8 and were thrown into the sea. Not known whether they were shot earlier. While the soldiers, powerless, testify from the shore the horrible massacre. Some reports indicate that were 120 officers who had such destiny, and some others say 150 officers. In addition, on October 7th, 32 officers were captured and executed in Kuch, a place not far from Saranda. The others who were panicked moved to mountainous areas and got shelter to the Albanians' houses. More than 40,000 Italians were sheltered or fought together with the Albanian population against the Nazi army. The ship, over 50 meters long, had served as a living underwater museum for the last 3 decades. In this museum, there were relics of the time and many different objects, as in a documentary frozen in the sequences of distant October of the World War II. Over the time following the Nazi bombing of 1943, the ship was facing with another danger, that of raiding the objects from anonymous divers or ancient relics traffickers. Albanian diver and ecologist Gjemal Mato told that during the dives a few years ago, in the ship I have seen an inventory of things, such as wine bottles and empty bottles, soldiers' boots, medical supplies and others. But in the next dives I noticed that the inventory was reducing from the thieves. Yet, even today, this ship and the tragic fate of the people represent more than just an episode. Thousands of Italians were drowned by the fear of their leaders to make right decisions quickly.